Running. Cool. So, welcome to another episode of Mental Health Wednesday. We apologize for kind of the short delay in the stream, but we definitely wanted to hop on here after basically a hiatus of 2 weeks now, I believe. I think we're past the special topic of grief, it seems like. Do you want to talk about what the survey was about today, Miss Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to start this new month. It's a short month because of spring break. We're only touching on the topic of boundaries for about 3 weeks. And so I think that boundaries are something that we don't learn a lot about in adulthood or when we're children. And the best way I can describe what boundaries are is that it's our ability to recognize what we say yes and no to. And so for our students in middle school, I think that this is a really good time to start talking about boundaries because it's when they first start understanding autonomy. I think about when we are babies and we are absolutely helpless. We don't, we can't say, like, don't touch me, don't pick me up, don't burp me. We don't say any of that. Our parents are largely in charge of protecting us with boundaries. When you're holding a tiny little Miss Lar, you don't just go and give them to any stranger. So that's a boundary, is to say, like, don't touch my child, thank you, this is mine, and it protects you. And so as we get older, we learn what our boundaries are. I don't just give my car to anyone to say, here, go ahead. No, I have a boundary. I don't let people just take my car and possibly run away with it. So anything from small boundaries to big boundaries, like get your own pen, or I don't have something for you to borrow, don't eat my chips, please. These are really, really important ways to practice learning the difference between knowing what you're comfortable with and knowing what you're uncomfortable with, so as to protect you the best that you can.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that comes to mind, especially for our middle schoolers, is our room. So sometimes our bedroom is kind of our boundary, and everything that's within our boundary is, there are possessions, there are special items of interest, they're just very sacred to us. And it's not just the items themselves, but the space alone. When you have like your own space, like the atmosphere that you set for that space is you and how you want it to be. So you feel a certain way. For example, being at your desk or being at on your own bed. So I think it makes me think of that. No one can and no one should really intervene and change that up unless it's with your consent. So that's what really my mind goes directly to. So I really appreciate you outlining in the survey. You talked about several types of boundaries in your video, and I really appreciate the variety that you mentioned with, like, just in the sense of time. Obviously, we talked about the physical boundaries, even like the mental, emotional boundaries. Obviously, that's been a big part of our conversation. Sometimes we get twisted by some words. Maybe they're interpreted or misconstrued. So how we talk about it, like the tone of our voice, those are all things that can trigger like certain memories or certain aspects of just our well-being mentally or emotionally in our head. So I think that's a really important thing to consider in terms of boundaries. And I think it's very important that you have the ability to say yes or no, but also why are you saying yes or no? Like, is it just by instinct, or is it by something that you've thought about carefully and have made a decision that is in the best interest of you and then others?
Yeah, absolutely. I think going back really quickly to privacy, that's a really good point. That's probably one of our students' first awareness of what I want. We're becoming more aware of what we want to share and what we don't want to share, which is a perfect way to start with boundaries. Sometimes our boundaries are defined for us. For example, if you share a room, that's going to be really hard to define your boundary. But I know students that share a room where they say, this side is my stuff. That side of the closet is mine. Don't touch this thing that's really important to me. And so you already begin to start telling people, this is important to me. please respect and follow what I have to say around what is mine. And that's what boundaries are, really. It's protecting what is yours, your time, your body, your energy, your emotions. How do we protect them so that they're not being taken advantage of by other people? And boundaries is the way to do it. It's not a boundary if I don't mind that you borrow my shoes. That's within my comfort zone. Go ahead and borrow my shoes. But if you want to borrow my most expensive shoes, no, that's something that I'm not comfortable with. And we have to respect other people's boundaries and hope that people are respective of ours. And so when it comes to material boundaries, I think that our middle schoolers and teenagers begin to understand that first. And if we can understand what we're comfortable with in terms of sharing, then maybe we can begin understanding what we're comfortable with our bodies, our time, our energy, things like that.
Yeah, and I think in this, situation, these circumstances that we've been, I think spatial and the physical boundaries are very obvious with social distancing, and it can be hard. I mean, there's obviously we talked about hate crimes as well. There are different situations that can be very difficult to navigate. What should I say, yes or no? And I think I'm going to be very transparent about an incident that I had to deal with, but I remember I was getting on the bus and a lady had come on and she didn't have a mask on. The bus driver didn't say anything, so I asked her if she had a mask. That triggered her and she didn't take it lightly. She basically yelled at me for asking such a rude question. It's none of my business, and so on and so forth. So I think those are tricky circumstances that sometimes we're placed in. If not, whatever other situations may be. And do we ask ourselves, do we regret saying no and taking a stance? Should I have said yes? All these different things. For me, I think in that situation, I don't regret it because we're all in it together. We have to do our part. And so that's why I followed up with the bus driver too. And I got the same reaction from the bus driver, unfortunately, as well. But those are conversations we try to have and give the rationale behind why we stuck up for what we said. And I think in the same sense with a lot of the hate crimes and a lot of the violence and whatnot, with all the social injustice that is still present in our society, in the American society, we're taking a stance for a reason. And I would hope that all of us take a step back, really think about why we are taking a stance, why we're saying yes or no to certain things, and being adamant about it. I think those are very tough questions. So that's what, makes me think about when you mentioned big to, or small, whether regardless of what those boundaries are, I think it's something we definitely have to navigate inevitably at some point. But it's also really important to again ponder why you're saying yes or no. Why are you standing up for this? Why are you not standing up for this? Or why are you taking a step back? Those are things we want to definitely consider.
Yeah, I think we're talking about definitely the ultimate boundary, which is safety, right? I don't want to put myself in a situation. I want to know my boundaries so that I can best protect myself, even when it comes to physical safety. For example, in an elevator, a shared space, if I'm in the elevator first and someone comes on without a mask, uh, I'm not going to ask them to put it on just because maybe it's their boundary that they don't want to be asked to wear a mask. So I leave. So I also have to follow my own boundaries. And what that means is, there's going to be a consequence. You're also talking about the ultimate boundary, which is the law. Um, and the law exists whether people like it or not, whether they want the consequences or not. If you run a red light, that is a boundary put on by the state. And they say that if you run a red light and you're caught, you have to pay a fee. And so that's a consequence for breaking boundaries. For me, if I stayed on the elevator with the mask and I let somebody come in without a mask and I say, I'm just going to let my boundaries be a little flexible right now. I'm going to go ahead and let them come on. And then I actually get COVID symptoms having shared a tight space with this person. Well, now I'm dealing with the consequences of not having followed through with my boundary of what I wasn't comfortable with. And so broken boundaries will always have consequences, whether it's for the person that broke it or the person who held it and it was broken. And so really we sometimes even have to protect ourselves, like what you're saying. If no one's going to respect my boundary, I have to respect it myself and leave a situation. And that's possible with a lot of different kinds of boundaries.
Yeah, and I mean, even going further back, if I rewind, it makes me think of like the mental, emotional boundaries as well. I mean, there are some times, I mean, even to this day, to be honest, too. I mean, we've talked about relationships and specifically talking about toxic relationships. So I used to
Okay.
boggle my mind in high school. I remember there was a girl that I had a crush on, and she had been with her boyfriend for a really long time. And then rumors started to spread, and a lot of us found out that her boyfriend was abusive. I don't know how abusive he was, but I heard it was physical at times. And so essentially she was getting hurt by someone that she loved. And it just boggled my mind that that was something she accepted. She said yes to, and did it set a boundary like, no, you cannot do this. This is not fair. This is not right. So on and so forth. So some of those things, like even when we like try to think about other people, it's hard to like imagine that. And then even for ourselves, if we're in that situation, sometimes complacency sets in, or maybe we get drowned out by the idea, the illusion that we're in love, like I don't want to lose this kind of thing. So I think it's really important, most importantly, like we've talked about in previous discussions about other specific topics, but like it's incredibly important that you know who you are, and continue to navigate that.
Yeah, I do say that when you know your boundary going into any situation, you'll be able to stick to your boundary better if you know what it is and if it's attached to your values. You're saying, wow, it turns out that people have really different values and really different boundaries from me. So, for example, anybody who might be in an abusive relationship for many reasons, if they're unable to get out, their boundaries might be different. They'll say, oh, it's okay that my partner cheats on me. Maybe that's not their boundary. That's not the top of what they are willing to leave for. But as soon as someone hurts me in that way, that's my boundary. I'm going to leave. So that's what I'm saying with a yes or no system. Yes, you can do that, and I'm saying no, you can't. I'm leaving. And so yes and no, what are you willing to um kind of let happen in your life, or what do you stay around for? And so we really want to make sure that if we can understand what we're saying yes and no to, we can protect ourselves the best way. Other people have different boundaries. And honestly, a lot of the times, as long as people aren't hurting themselves or others, I'll understand. But if someone, like you're saying, maybe their boundaries are very flexible and they don't have strict boundaries, and they end up receiving a lot of pain and hurt, well then it becomes a two-way problem. Someone's not respecting your boundaries, and you're not respecting your own boundaries as well in order to leave.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's important to self-analyze and self-examine for sure. And brought up a couple really important points. And I think for me, I think if you're gonna say something, if you're gonna set a boundary, especially like with your friends or like a partner, for example, or maybe even your family too, like you set a boundary and it's like really important for you, you want to make sure it is actually important for you instead of like getting caught up in the moment, like just getting super emotional, for example, for one thing, and then just saying like, look, I'm going to keep it this way, because ultimately if you set that boundary, they expect you to keep it consistent and stick to it instead of like wishy-washy about certain things too. So I think that's really important to analyze and actually carry out, and stay consistent with if you're going to actually take a stand. So I think that's really important about what you talked about in terms of like how you can set those boundaries and what you can say exactly. I think sometimes like, going back to tough situations, what what do you think we should do if it's just really tough? They're not listening. Like, look, I told you, like, I'm not comfortable with this. Like, no, no means no. Like, and they're not getting it.
Mhm. Well, I definitely want to remind people that just because somebody has a reaction to the boundary that you set doesn't mean that you have to change it. Someone could be really upset that I don't want to give them my car. But that's not going to change anything when I'm really serious about not giving them my car. So we want to really stick to our convictions and our boundaries because we have a right to. I want our students to know that we have a right to say no to things that we are uncomfortable with. And if somebody else is not going to respect that and they are angry, sad, they're showing you guilty, they're crying, they're allowed to have an emotional reaction, but that doesn't change your boundary. I'm not going to give you my car, no matter whether you're crying, whether you're yelling at me. I'm not comfortable with this, so I'm not going to do that. That takes a lot of conviction and a lot of practice. And I don't expect that our students get there immediately. But the things that we can do actually as educators is to respect our students' boundaries and start to show them by practice that I will respect your boundaries when you're saying no. You don't want a hug? Oh, okay, cool. Is an elbow okay? Like we need to respect our students' boundaries too. And then they'll start to see, wow, adults can respect my boundaries. And if we're in a tough situation where people aren't respecting our boundaries, I do have a list here on the video today of what to say. All of these things could be said. I'm not comfortable with this. Please don't do that. I can't do that for you. This doesn't work for me. This is not acceptable. And very simply, I don't want to do that. If I hear someone say any of those things to me, I don't want to push them anymore because now I'm probably forcing them to do something they don't want to do. And if you have someone in your life that's forcing you to do things that you don't want to do, then really that person needs to work on themselves because it's not about you. It's not about your boundaries and whether they should be changed for that person. So this is actually a really serious topic, boundaries. It's incredibly pervasive. Like I said, it goes from the smallest thing to the largest thing. And, we're getting into a topic even around like things like consent. And so boundaries are so important. They keep us safe. And I can start small around our students. If you don't want to share your chips, say no. And if someone says no to sharing chips with you, that's their right, because that's their chips. So from the smallest example to the biggest, we're going to talk about boundaries.
Yeah, and some of them are really tricky too. I mean, we have like catchphrases too. Like for example, when we have visitors, like close family friends, especially like, "Hey, make yourself feel at home," or "Mi casa es su casa." But at the same time, like if you notice your friend is just like coming into your house, just going through the fridge, going through the cabinet, and just like opening stuff, not being neat, and then just
wearing your clothes. Yeah.
Yeah, if it gets to that level, yeah, sure. And then like, yo, actually, okay, I meant what I said, but like not to this level. So those are like the nuances of like boundaries, like setting like certain limits here and there. And if you're truly comfortable, if you don't care about it, then sure. I mean, that's again, it's at your discretion. But I think those are small things that can become bigger things. But I think on to end this conversation, I think my advice from my end is just like make sure you don't get too comfortable letting people stomp all over your own boundaries, essentially.
Yeah.
And essentially, if you're doing that and not saying anything, it's gonna get to a point where like you blow up or they just like really cross the line, and it's gonna be bad.
Yeah.
So I think I would avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, and we'll keep going. This is a huge topic, so we'll continue to talk about it. And I do hope to, by the end of the month, really empower our students to practice saying no.
So yeah, if you guys have any questions, whether it's parents or students, make sure to continue to reach out to your teachers or staff, and obviously our wonderful counselor here, Miss Lar. We do have our sessions continually happening throughout the weeks. Do remember that we will not be back for another week next week, though, because spring break is happening. So please take the time, the whole week, to relax, reset, and we'll see you again.
Yep. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Take care, Miss Lar.
You too.